Icarus from Oblivion's Dawn here. Just wanted to go over a guide for how to increase the effectiveness of yourself as a healer with a Restoration Druid. So I'm going to be making these for a couple different classes that I have. I do a lot of min-maxing and things like that where I really try to do whatever I can to squeeze every last drop of power or heals, damage, etc. out of my class. And I kind of wanted to go over my process for that, what I look at, and just best practices, talent choices, things like that for getting the best results out of your class. So the first thing to go over is going to be talents. So we'll start by looking at those. Most of the talents are just situational, but there are a few sort of really key ones for increasing your healing output. First one we have, obviously, is Displacer Beast. Very situational. It's great for getting out of the way of certain damage, Touch of Dooms, Archimonde's Allure of Flames, those types of things. But it's really just kind of a mobile, oh shit, I need to be over there faster type of ability. The second tier, Ysera's Gift, is going to be your best bet. Cenarian Ward's also a good choice. It's a nice situational one. However, Ysera's Gift is you turn it on and you forget about it. You don't need an extra ability, and the healing output from it is actually pretty nice. Third tier, Typhoon, situational. It's great for certain circumstances, like, if you have a bunch of Infernals dropping on you on Manaroth and they're right where the group's standing, you need to move them a little bit out of the way. That, along with your sixth tier, is that sixth or is that fifth? I think that's fifth, actually. Sorry, Ursul's Vortex is also sort of great for that sort of circumstance, grouping mobs together, pulling them all in, those types of things. However, your fourth tier is your first real big cooldown as a Druid, the Incarnation Tree of Life. It's a fantastic one. It empowers a bunch of your abilities, and it allows you to output some pretty intense numbers. So your Wild Growth affects more targets, your Rejuves have reduced mana cost, your Regrowths are going to be instant cast, which we'll talk more about that in a moment, but that's going to be really helpful. And it actually allows you, if you sort of use it, at points where you would sometimes use Trank, but maybe, Trank isn't the right thing for that purpose, or Trank's on cooldown, it's a great one to use that can really help keep a raid alive in really bad circumstances. Nature's Vigil is another really good one. That's your second to the last tier. What it does, and we'll go and mouse over this here, but 20% of the healing you do to a target, or damage, of course, will go, cleave off as extra heals. So if we look at this here, what this sort of does for us is actually pretty cool, because it says single target healing. Things like Rejuve and Life Bloom actually count, and that's something that a lot of people don't realize is, as a healer, your Nature's Vigil is really powerful because every single hot you have on a target will actually be triggering Nature's Vigil as well, along with your single target abilities. So it's extremely helpful. Your final tier, Germination, that's probably the best one to choose. The other ones require very strange playstyles. I found that, Germination is so easy to use because you're already casting Rejuves all the time anyways, and it's going to allow you to effectively double your healing output in a lot of circumstances with one of your more efficient, mana per heal spells, as long as you use it correctly. So those are probably the best ones to choose, I've found. I don't find I change them around a lot for certain fights. Like some classes, you have a lot of situational based things. These pretty much just stay the same as long as you're playing. Alright, let's go and go to glyphs. So glyphs is sort of the next big thing. These, these sort of have fixed choices as well. So the first one is going to be your Glyph of Regrowth. What this does is it increases the crit strike chance of your regrowth by 40%, but it no longer does healing over time. Some people don't like that because they sort of feel like that healing over time effect is intrinsic to how you play the Druid. However, the advantage of this is that it sort of makes regrowth replace your healing touch in a lot of circumstances. Obviously, when you're using abilities such as Nature's Swiftness, where it makes an instant cast, you're still going to use healing touch. But for the most part, you get the same about heals per second out of it, but you get that drastically reduced cast time that you get with regrowth, which is really helpful. And that's also helpful too because, again, we talked earlier about that Incarnation Tree of Life that makes your regrowth instant cast. Doesn't make your healing touches instant cast. So by increasing the crit chance 40%, you have basically allowed yourself to instant cast, just bomb heal like crazy when you're in that mode if the circumstance requires it. Wild Growth Glyph is actually pretty good too. So it increases the cooldown a little bit, but increases the targets it affects by 1. So the biggest advantage of this is that Wild Growth is an extremely mana inefficient spell as it is, and you're only using it when you have no choice because you have, well, a lot of damage going out to AoE. So this just helps that efficiency a bit, and you're not spamming it all the time anyways, so that cooldown is not really a big deal. The last one that I choose, that's I find pretty good, is the Glyph of Rebirth. Some might find this as a must-use. It's probably not, but basically it allows you to bring your target back with 100% health, which is great for circumstances where when they take it, they're about to take damage again. They won't get instantly killed. I see that happen a lot with a lot of battle reses, and the ability to make sure that they're fully alive when they come back, while it is very circumstantial, is extremely helpful for not wasting what you just did. So those are my talents, those are my glyphs, and I found that these work well, and again, I don't really swap these with certain situations like a lot of classes do, so that's actually pretty convenient from a Druid perspective. Alright, so the next thing we want to go over is our stat priority. Now, I realize this is going to be sort of a lot to take in, so hopefully those things, you can just cookie cutter your way through the talents and through the glyphs, as well as through the stat priority. These things aren't really necessary to really think about on a day-to-day thing. They're not really part of how you play your class. This is all part of how you set your class up. So your best stats are haste, mastery, right? So those two are going to be pretty big for you. Then, you have multi, you have crit, you have things like that. Multi's better than crit, and it sort of kind of goes down from there. Spirit's a very situational stat. You stack it wherever you can, because only certain slots can have spirit, such as your rings and your cloak and your neck. But you only really, and trinkets for that matter, but you only use it until you get to a point to where you're comfortable with your mana consumption and your mana regeneration, and then you continue working towards your haste and your mastery. Haste is your best stat. Alright, mastery is a really good stat, but mastery is also much more situational, and we'll talk about that shortly. So just for convenience sake, if you're ever working on crafting gear, or you're working on, baleful gear or anything like that, Fever Flare is going to be your friend. So if we go and pull up our panel here, character panel, we can sort of see, haste, mastery, that sort of thing, but if we were to look at a baleful item, I don't even know if I have one, but my crafted staff, for example, Fever Flare, haste, mastery. So that right there is an example of sort of your best in slot type item for this class. You don't want crit, you don't really want multi in here. Those aren't bad, but those are just going to decrease your effectiveness for your item level. Alright, so from that though, what does that mean? What do we do? How do we use these? So healing as a restoration druid is pretty similar to what it's always been. I know there's been some ups and downs with, Life Bloom, how many targets it can have. Now it can only have one target, etc., etc. But the big thing that's always stayed key to the class has been rejuvenation, and that being your primary spell. Alright, so that still is the case. So you have rejuvenation, you have Life Bloom, you have Wild Growth, you have Regrowth, Healing Touch, you have your Swift Mend, and you have your Wild Mushroom. I'm going to assume everyone knows what those abilities do. I'm not going to go into detail about how your abilities work, because if you don't know that, at this point, probably not quite the guide, because this is more about min-maxing than this is about what a druid is, how you heal as a restoration druid. So here's where it starts to get tricky. So one of the key things for being effective as a restoration druid when it comes to raiding and when it comes to being in any sort of AoE damage circumstance is your uptime. It's not just about active percent, but it's about all of your hots being on as many targets as they can, but also on the right targets and not letting them fall off. Now this can get really tricky, and we're going to go into how to sort of solve this problem in a moment, but one of the things I kind of want to talk about is how we look at that, how we even know what we're doing, right? Because you might think you're doing really well, but your heals per second is always really low in comparison to what you'd expect. And a lot of that can come from poor timing, but a lot of that can come from not realizing when things are going wrong. The first and most common mistake that restoration druids I've ever seen make is not paying attention to their mastery buff. So if we look at our mastery buff here, what this does is every time we do a direct healing spell, it increases the amount of healing we get by 27% to our periodic healing for 20 seconds. And this increases with your mastery. And this is why mastery is our second most effective stat. The problem is if you are stacking mastery, but you are not taking advantage of this buff and keeping it up, then you are literally, why are you wearing gear with that stat? You'd be better off with any other stat. So making sure that you have the maximum uptime of this mastery is essential. Now we're going to go and cast a heal so you can see what that looks like. So if we look up in the top right corner, we can see right here, Harmony. During this time, I am now gaining just passively on every regrowth that's out, not regrowth, sorry, every rejuvenation that's out, every life bloom that's out, every wild growth that's out, by that amount. That's pretty intense. That's an enormous bonus to your heals. And the best part is it's only every 20 seconds. Now you might have just heard that kind of horn sound in the background there, and that's actually one of the things we're going to talk about later, sort of tools to help you be effective at using these abilities. But I just want to really emphasize the point there. 27%, and it will rise with your item level. So the more geared you are, the bigger of a percentage increase your mastery is giving you, and the more important, therefore, that it is to keep it up. And all it requires is a single target heal every 20 seconds within that amount of time. Swift Mend has a 15-second cooldown, and will activate it. If I go ahead and do a rejuve on myself, and I pop Swift Mend, bam, a Harmony's triggered. My Swift Mend will be able to go on my character again, or on any other character, before that's done. That means my Harmony could never fall off. I also have regrowth, right? You know, you have other ways to go ahead and keep this up. So we hit it again, rejuve, bam, there you go. It's refreshed again before it fell off. So this is the most essential point to this. Now, there are other things that are really, really important. Pardon the noise it's going to make in a second when that falls off again. So the other things that are important is your spell priority. I talked earlier about how Wild Growth was horribly mana inefficient. A lot of people, when a lot of raid damage starts going out, their instinctive response is to Wild Growth and to use AoE heals. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's not your job. You can heal just as effectively by layering rejuvenations. The key thing is by layering them in such a way to where they already have them on them when the damage starts going out. You know, the moment they get tagged, the moment the ability's about to happen, you preemptively heal. You throw the HOD on them anyways, right? You see that, okay, Feast of Souls is starting up soon on Gorefiend. So, you know, a few seconds before it starts, you start tossing your rejuves onto everyone. And because you have Germination, you can also double rejuve them. You could rejuve. You know, you can stack even more onto there, and that just increases your effectiveness. This is essential to not just increasing your output as a healer, because it will, don't get me wrong. Rejuvenation, and stacked rejuvenations especially, vastly better healing than a Wild Growth does. It's pretty intense, the difference. But also, you'll spend less mana doing it, and that's the best part about it. Because you'll run out of mana and be at some really low healing amount done if you're just relying on your AoE heals during those circumstances. It's being a Resto Druid is not about waiting for the damage to happen and healing through it. That is other healers' jobs. Your job is to passively heal people as they take the very initial ticks of damage. You capitalize on that bit, and then you have other bits for emergencies, obviously. Another example of this is Wild Mushroom. Dropping Wild Mushroom, it's not a raid cooldown. It's not a big AoE heal. You should just always have it sit in your melee group. If ranged is stacked, always have it sit there stacked. It costs very little mana, and it's just passive healing happening to everybody standing in it for 30 seconds. Why wouldn't you use it? You know, that's a mistake I see. People will have 4 casts of their Wild Mushrooms for the entire fight. Why? That's almost free healing you could have had for everybody standing within it for that entire time. Nature's Vigil, free healing. Again, you know, it's a cooldown you use. These things, there's not really... The best circumstances for these things are when damage is higher than normal. Obviously, when damage becomes unbearable, that's when you pop a big cooldown. But these are things you can just passively do that reduces the stress on the other healers and increases your healing amount as well. Right? We're not trying to pad our numbers, in a sense, but in a sense we also are, because a Druid's heals aren't shields. We can't pad our numbers by building bubbles and heals and things like that. That was actual damage that had to be healed in order to do that, which is entirely a good thing. You should pad your numbers in that circumstance. Alright, so I want to show you here an example. So this is a Warcraft Logs fight from Fell Lord Zakoon from the other day. What this is an example of sort of, you know, this isn't really, I'm going to say, a best case scenario, but a fairly good case scenario of looking at, you know, your buffs, your rejuves, what you're doing during the fight, and kind of keeping things sustained the way you should. So the things you'll notice are the rejuvenation uptime, the rejuvenation germination uptime, and the harmony uptime. Now in this particular example, if you see my life bloom, it did fall off a lot more than it should, and we'll talk about that more later. But, you know, basically, if you were to look at this and compare this to a lot of Resto Druids out there, you'd see, you know, comparable parses where rejuvenation and harmony are closer to 60% or under 60% for their uptimes. And whenever harmony's not up, you've lost 27% plus, you know, healing done. You know, your rejuvenation, that is a lot of healing that you're missing out on during that time. So anyways, I think that point's sort of hammered in right now, you know, sort of how you use those abilities, which ones you use in those circumstances. But the other thing, yeah, is uptime. So how do you look at this? How do you track this? Well, there's two sort of ways you use hand in hand, right? You can use, obviously, Warcraft logs, which is what I just showed you. But the other option is using things like WeakAuras as well. This is how you track it during the fight. You can analyze your results with Warcraft logs really well, but the actual process during the raid of making sure you're doing it right can be vastly made better through the use of WeakAuras. So what we can see here is an example of a WeakAura. So this one right here tracks my harmony buff. So right now it's red. What this means is my harmony buff is not on, right? It's sort of a nice indicator. Get that back up. So when I go ahead and I cast it, we can see that there it is. It has a nice timer ticking down for when my harmony expires. So that way I have a nice easy visual as well as a number to be able to rebuff. So if I want to go ahead and refresh that, I cast a single target heal and there we go. The cool part too is that when it expires, it makes that horn sound, which is a nice auditory cue for if I'm really focused on everything else going on to let me know, hey, I need to go ahead and do another heal. A direct heal to refresh my harmony. Alright, the other thing that happens is Swiftmend. So since Swiftmend is probably your most efficient way to refresh it, I have it set up so when Swiftmend is available, it's off cooldown, it pops up an icon there, and I can use that, you know, to do that. So that's another kind of nice one. That's not nearly as important though. Another one is Life Bloom. So this is where we start to get into more situational things. So Life Bloom is a great ability. Life Bloom does a lot of healing, a lot more than people give it credit for, especially since you can only put it on one target. However, your tier sets increase not just the number of times it blooms, which is super effective, but also you can put it on multiple targets, which is also really huge. Keeping an uptime on your Life Bloom is really good for giving yourself your clear cast procs, because that's what gets procced off of it, as well as just extra healing. So you might as well, right? You might as well, especially if there's two. So what we have set up here is basically a system for me to be able to track my Life Bloom uptime as well. And of course, as you can see, it refreshes. And this is set up in a way to where if I had a second target with Life Bloom on it, it would also show that there as well. And I'll go ahead and put links for these WeakAuras in a paste bin link in the description for this video. So these are also really great things to track. Again, it's helpful for your, you know, your clear casting procs, those sorts of things. Clear casting is another WeakAura I have here. Watches it never procs, because why would it proc if I'm recording, right? So I'll just keep refreshing it here. But situational things, right? So tier set positively affects our Life Bloom, quite positively. However, there's something that's even better than that effect, and that is the class trinket off Archimonde for a Resto Druid. In general, the class trinket from Archimonde, which causes your rejuvenations to basically cleave an AoE heal onto the people around them, can account for, in a lot of fights, for about 70+% of the healing done of rejuve. You get an extra 70% of that healing done just from that class trinket. This is just another reason why it is essential that you keep the uptime on your rejuvenation high. On fights such as Gorefiend, if you Wild Growth is your #1 spell, or a Wild Mushroom, or any of those types of abilities, or Regrowth, all of that is healing you missed out on. You have tripled the mana cost with those abilities, and you have lost out on what would have been better healing done by using rejuvenation because of that trinket and the fact that it would have been cleaving off onto all the targets. Every single target has a chance, every tick. So if you have rejuve up on 5 targets, that's 5 targets that could tick a cleave for extra heals on other people around them. That's pretty effective. Alright, so I think that pretty much kind of goes over how you use the class, how you sort of pull those high numbers out of it. And it takes practice. It takes setting up WeakAuras, it takes paying attention to your abilities, and then it takes looking over logs. So how do you access what you need to find in logs? It's not actually that complicated. Basically what you're going to do is, if you never set up logging before, you will need to set up an account on warcraftlogs.com. You're going to go into your settings, your I think it's under System, and then Network, and then you're going to want to enable Advanced Combat Logging. And then what's going to happen is if you type in /combat log into your chat, it'll say combat logging has started. You use that along with the Warcraft Logs uploader tool, which it has instructions on how all that works, and it allows you to upload that combat log and then view it, and it sort of creates a nice interface for you, which you can see here. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to select your fight, and then once you've selected your fight, you're going to go to the Buffs tab under the, so you're going to have Analyze selected and then the Buffs sort of sub-tab. And then from there, you're going to want to select the source. So you have all friendlies and all sources, sort of kind of at the right below that, and you're going to select yourself from the all sources. And that will give you a list of all of the buffs and spells that were active from you. And from here, you can look at your percentages. So basically what it does is it will show you the account, the number of times you did the ability, as well as the percentage of time during the fight, while the fight was in combat, how often your spells were up. And your goal is to get as high as you can. Rejuvenation, Germination, Harmony, and Life Bloom. The other abilities aren't a big deal. Wild Mushroom is a good one to do as well, but if you can get those other abilities with a high uptime, your heals per second will be incredibly high. For example, at item level 694, I was able to pull over 60,000 heals per second on Fellowlord Zakuun, and that's what this is, although I think this was a more recent parse, because the uptimes were pretty good. But even that had room for improvement. My Life Bloom only had a 65% uptime. My Harmony was only 94%. But anyways, hopefully this helped. Hopefully you guys will be able to use logs and start looking through your performance and making improvements where you can. Hopefully this wasn't so long-winded that you closed this 30 minutes ago, that kind of thing. But yeah, if it's been helpful, great. If not, then I guess, work on it on your own. But I found that all of these things has really helped allow me to pull the absolute most that I can out of my class on all of the different fights, even with a lower item level than I should be for those fights. Thank you.